Hello and welcome to Counsel Culture, the Business of Law podcast. I'm Eldine, one of the account directors at Byfield, and this morning I'm joined by Michael Evans, our joint managing director. How are you, Michael?
I'm good, thanks, El. Nice to do a podcast again, and I think it's the first time we've done it, isn't it?
It is, which is lovely. So it's been a busy week, I think, news-wise in the legal sector. So we'll get straight into it with an interesting story I saw in Non-Billable this week regarding Garfield AI going head-to-head with a lawyer. So Garfield AI went head-to-head with a trainee solicitor in drafting a real legal claim. They were both asked to analyse a small claims dispute between a builder and a client. And the results were quite interesting. So they were blind judged by the trainee's supervisor, who concluded that Garfield's version would be acceptable in a court of law. However, missed key details around references to precedent, such as the case establishing that a WhatsApp message can form a contract. So even though it was decided that the trainee's work was the stronger of the two, Garfield AI's claim would stand in a court of law. And I think what was most interesting was the cost difference between the two. So Garfield would charge the builder around £100 for the claim, which it produced in about 10 minutes, while the human version took 3 to 4 hours and cost over £1,000. So the client said in this situation, he would definitely choose Garfield on this basis alone, even though the lawyer's work was stronger. Are you surprised at all by that, Michael, or do you think that is sort of to be expected from this technology?
I think I'd have been surprised a couple of years ago, but I don't think I'm surprised now. I think it's fascinating because I think people are increasingly asking, consumers are increasingly asking AI tools legal questions anyway.
Yes.
And I think that it is very smart to get ahead of that, where for smaller issues, parking, private car park operator fines and appeals and stuff, small claims court matters, things like that. People aren't going to pay lawyers thousands of pounds anyway. They don't really, but people should be advised. They should have some kind of advice. And, a lot of people will pay £100. Very few people will pay £1,000 for something small, unless it's really point of principle, unless they've got plenty of money. So it feels like a good way to narrow the gap for particularly at that kind of consumer end of law, smaller matters. Actually, from an access to justice perspective, it could be transformational in giving like regular people, people like you and me, and small businesses, individuals, access to reasonable quality legal advice that is fit for purpose at a price point that makes sense for them.
Yes, exactly. And I think that there's a whole debate around AI versus lawyers. And Garfield's CEO actually came out and said that, Garfield's built to work with lawyers, not against them, basically. So I think that there's that whole debate, and he's sort of arguing against that.
And if you think about like, in this particular space, actually, there's a ton of stuff where people are doing it unadvised or not doing it. So there's lots of things in here, I think, where actually it's an untapped market rather than eating like traditional law firms' lunch. There may be some stuff which would have gone to a firm which now is done via a Garfield type law firm. But I think the biggest opportunity is actually where people aren't getting legal advice or trying to do it to do it themselves or not doing it at all. That's probably the biggest market for this sort of like consumer facing stuff, because it's not like firms are making tons and tons of money out of it anyway. It's actually just not functioning very well because people aren't advised or trying to do it themselves.
Yes, I guess it's that sort of small claims market. Increasing the access to justice, I think, is an interesting perspective. I was speaking to a client actually who's saying that they're seeing a lot of a huge increase in AI generated claims, sort of clients coming to them with something already drafted through ChatGPT and then being asked to sort of make tweaks and submit on their behalf and sort of hoping to reduce fees in the process. But I think, there are issues sometimes with accuracy in those sorts of submissions.
Yeah, but good enough. Maybe
Yes.
actually maybe actually pretty good. And
Yes.
there are questions. Certainly, there are lots of amazing high street lawyers out there, and there are lots of high street lawyers that are not that great.
Mm.
So it's I do think that the not very attentive, not particularly good ones, this
Mm.
sort of thing will have an impact. So I don't see it as a bad thing if clients are starting from a better base of knowledge.
Yes. And I think that feeds nicely into another story we saw this week. A new benchmarking surveys come out by Val's AI showing that AI tools are now outperforming lawyers on legal research tasks as well. So again, probably not unsurprising.
No, it's not, but it's not surprising. I mean, I think the key line in this is really there's a sentence in here where although there was an outperformance in certain like simple, straightforward questions, the study found human lawyers continue to hold an edge where deeper contextual understanding,
Mm,
nuanced judgment, and multi-layered reasoning are required. So, context is king, really. And so straightforward research, it's great. I mean, again, it's a good thing that tools that do better research more quickly are available because it, you know, this is not fulfilling life enhancing work
mm,
doing, spending your life as a junior in any profession doing like fairly basic but research into a complicated issue. And I think it raises questions about how those more junior lawyers build their knowledge. But if that knowledge has become a bit irrelevant anyway, because actually you use an AI tool to do research and look into things, it's about building the skills to interpret things instead of, you know, just doing a large, extensive research task. You may coordinate it using AI tools, so there'll still be people to do it. But actually, I think it will make work more interesting. But of course, there is a bit of a jolt to be felt across the industry, as it should be, as a ton of tasks that were previously manual become automated and better.
mm. Yeah, exactly that. And I saw in City AM this week that there is a New York-based firm, Pearson Ferdinand, which is fully remote with no associates. Um, Really interesting. So they've opened a London office, I think in July last year. They have a couple of associates in London, but no associates at all in the US, because they're just relying more on AI to sort of do those more tasks that junior lawyers would traditionally do. And they have sort of more partner-heavy structure. Do you think that this is a sign of things to come, or do you think this is very much sort of an isolated um, sort of trend?
Um, I don't think that you can get away from the fact that you need a hierarchy of doing things and coordinating things. And sure, you can. I think there's room for multiple models in the legal
Mm,
sector, and technology and remote working frees up um, people who want to do senior led work. They want to be doing it themselves. They really enjoy doing the work themselves. Clients who want it to be senior led, but couldn't afford for to go to one of the more traditional big global law firms and just have partners doing the work. Um, yeah, fine. That's if that's what a client wants, and there's a firm
mm,
to sort of meet that need, and that need can be met more efficiently and effectively through use of technology, then great. I don't think I think we've always had a multi-model market. That multi-model market will persist and just become a little bit more sophisticated, a little bit more complex. But I wouldn't see this as necessarily being the future. There are question marks about the roles and junior lawyers, what they will be, how they'll be adding value, because that is going to have to shift because of AI, but that applies in across the knowledge economy. It's a little bit focused on it's a bit hyper focused in law at the moment because it does mean that that the efficiencies are particularly great and the fees are particularly high for junior resource. So there are particularly strong incentives
Mm.
to make those changes, and they will play out in a way which is, there's a saying in technology, which is a very old saying, which is that things change less quickly than we expect, but more quickly than we realize. And I think it's
Mm.
something where we're expecting swathes of associates to be like on the chopping block next week, and that's not going to happen
Yes.
like that. But if you look back in 3 years' time, if you look at the industry in 3 years' time and look back to where it is now or where it was 2 years ago, I would certainly say that 2027 or 2028 versus 2023 is going to be very different. Of course,
Mm.
it always looks different, but I think it's going to be very different largely because of the emergence of effective AI that can work to a high professional standard. And it's hard to see the impact in the round at that kind of granular level in the day to day. But I think, certainly different types of firms are emerging, but I don't think it spells the end for the traditional firm, even if a reshaping of the hierarchy and the volumes of junior lawyers versus partners will evolve in line with how the technology can be deployed.
Mm. I think there's a lot of scaremongering in the media as well around AI replacing jobs too. Um, so I think as a junior lawyer, you'd see these headlines and potentially be quite concerned, but I think it's not sort of as dramatic as maybe it's being perceived in the press.
Well, we think about it in our business, don't we? It's like
Mm.
it's like what we talk about any kind of client-facing people, professional services business, and this is about lawyers, but there are other professional services are available. There's the PR industry, is accountancy. There's plenty of professional services which are historically people-driven, and it's about doing the things that AI can't do. AI cannot build a trusted client relationship. It
Yes.
cannot make judgment calls based on
Mm.
the nuances of different parties in litigation. It cannot, in our case, build a relationship with a journalist, and so it's about across, including in law and everywhere else, on the people side of the things, the business needs to learn how to deploy this technology in a way which drives efficiencies, quality, profit opportunities, not just threats. And the people need to think about, how do I add value in ways that AI, by doing things that AI cannot do.
Yes. And I think junior lawyers who know how to use this technology will set themselves apart as well. Okay, moving on to sort of tax regulation and transparency. I think we've had two really big news stories this week. I think we'll start first with the news that Rachel Reeves is considering ending the NI exemption that currently applies to partnerships. It's anticipated this would affect around 200,000 people and raise 1.9 billion if enacted, and would affect, LLPs both across law and accountancy. So I think there's been sort of quite a divisive reaction among the legal sector. I think we're having some people who support it, a lot of people who are, understandably against it. What do you think about the response that we've seen so far, Michael?
I think that there is a very simple rule, which I remember having a conversation with a partner many years ago when I was at Herbert Smith about this, when the government had brought in the additional rate and lifted it, up, and it was for a brief period of time uh, above 50%,
Mm.
and and it and and he was saying, I really remember the conversation very well. He said, he'd always, this was in the sort of towards the final days of New Labour, so last time Labour were in charge, and he said he'd always been a Labour supporter, but he'd got to the point now where, even though he's a high earner, the point of principle, you cannot let people keep less than half of what they make. Once you cross that threshold of taking more than half of what somebody is making, it it is becomes egregious. And fundamentally, I think I agree with that. And the issue here is that taking away this exemption, whether you think the exemption should be there or not, because of the way things are structured, would on average take the marginal rate, um, above 50%. And it's in a slightly different way in that it's sort of a partnership kind of being taxed, but the way it would play out would effectively be doing that. And more broadly, I think we're just at this stage where this fiddling around the edges of trying to raise a billion here, a billion there. I know they're big numbers, but we have got a massive fiscal hole that is in the region of 100 billion a year, and it needs something more radical to address that at some point. Whether that is now, probably not. Whether that's in a year or whether it's in 3 years. And fiddling around increasing the complexity of the tax code, because every time you do this, you're increasing complexity and trying to find a bit here, a bit there. And most of it is targeted at, yes, for people with broader shoulders and all of that. But fundamentally, we have a situation where it's going to stop. It's not viable to do this time and time and time again without dealing with the underlying issue that we are spending more than we are making, and it's very hard for whatever reason to get any proper growth going in the economy. And so I don't disagree a bit with with making people who are making a lot of money pay a bit more tax in one way or another. But I do think we're getting to a point where it's going to become quite harmful, and eventually it's going to start raising less money than they expect. So, I'm not advocating for, I don't, and also, frankly, law firm partners might make a lot of money, but they pay a hell of a lot of tax already. They pay a hell of a lot of tax already, and that needs to be. We need to bear that in mind.
I think there are concerns as well that this will disproportionately affect small firms, boutique to sort of medium size, rather than the larger firms anyway. So I think that there are concerns it's just going to put additional strain on those small firms.
Well, it's a funny way, as I think, as somebody said, it's a funny, the service, big law is a rare success story for the UK. This professional services is a rare success story for the UK. Unlike manufacturing, where we basically don't really do it anymore on any scale, professional services, we are genuinely a world leader. And, and to if we want to promote that, then this is not really the way to do it.
Yeah. It'll be interesting to see whether that will be enacted in the budget. We'll be keeping an eye on that news.
I think it probably will.
Yeah, it's looking that way. And then finally, another big story from this week is that the FCA will be taking on sort of responsibility and oversight for anti-money laundering in the legal sector. And the SRA will no longer have oversight of that. So again, we've seen sort of quite a big response from the legal sector from this news. What do you think, Michael?
I think it took people by surprise, funnily enough, including the SRA. They were ironically having their annual conference the day it was announced and had not been informed until that morning. And they had, from what I understand anyway, they had not been given advance notice. And so that made for an interesting day. What I understand was quite an unusually fiery SRA conference with some quite difficult questions from the audience. But the SRA struggled to answer from what I hear. I won't go into further detail. And look, I think it's a bit of an exercise here in being careful. I've been talking to a few people about this, and I think there's a little bit of being careful what you wish for. Lawyers have been bashing the SRA for a long time, including on AML stuff. And I suspect that having the FCA taking this on, although initially they might go a little bit soft while they're working out how to handle law firms, they are going to be much less accommodating to context and principles and mitigation than the SRA and SDT are.
Yes.
And I suspect that in 3 or 4 years, the legal profession may be pining for the days when AML compliance and related issues were managed and dealt with by the SRA, because it's going to be much more rules based. It's going to be, well, yeah, okay, you got reasons, fine, but you still broke rules. Here's a big fine. And I suspect, because it's all about the numbers, financial regulation, etc., they will also at some point issue fines which are completely several orders of magnitude larger than anything that we've ever seen from the SDC. And perhaps firms will be, well, maybe we shouldn't have been quite so vigorous in our bashing of the SRA down the years over this. So that's what I think. I don't know whether it will come to pass, but let's see.
Yeah, and Rachel Reeves said that I think the idea around this was it's designed to drive growth and cut pointless admin. Do you think that?
I would say, I think I said this in a LinkedIn post. I would say that only a Labour government would would give an entire sector two regulators instead of one, and say this is a blitz on red tape. So it's a very it's an interesting way to reduce bureaucracy by giving thousands and thousands of professional services firms across accountancy, legal sector, etc., 2 regulators and 2 sets of fees. So yes, like I said, it's a very Labour way of addressing bureaucracy.
Yeah. Watch this space. Great. That's everything for today.
Oh, no, one more thing.
No?
We're just on the transparency pilot in the courts. Let's talk about that really briefly. No,
Yes.
that's right. So the one other thing was that the commercial court transparency pilot was, which was supposed to start at the beginning of October, was reconfirmed earlier this week by Justice Cockrell, and will start in January. So that will mean for a 2-year pilot, there will be disclosure requirements around aspects of documentation. So what we'll see is, I think the platform, which currently is behind closed doors for documents to be uploaded relating to litigation, there'll be an external portal of the same system. You'll have to register, but it will be free and so on, and then look for case numbers or details, etc. And so as soon as a document is referred to or used in open court, then there will be 2 days for that document. So skeleton arguments, witness statements, expert reports. I think it's slightly longer for expert reports. Everything else is 2 days to be uploaded to this portal. So that will provide additional kind of interesting dynamics, I think, for how litigation plays out more publicly. We've seen, a bit of a retreat, certainly in the mainstream press, from live court reporting. Journalists will only turn up to the really big stuff, apart from maybe Law 360 and occasionally Bloomberg. This will give journalists an opportunity to, in effect, know more and understand what is going on in legal disputes without actually having to go to the court. And I think it's something which will lead to, talking your own, but greater needs for litigation, PR planning, reputational consequences of disputes, and thinking that through, just because there will be a lot more access, there will be more media interest, because it's making it easier for journalists.
Okay, great. Well, that's it. All we have time for this week. Thanks so much for joining me.
Thank you.
You've been listening to Counsel Culture, the Business of Law podcast, brought to you by Byfield. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and join us again next week, where we'll be discussing some more of the biggest stories in the legal sector.